Donkey Kong Country has entered the realm that few games are able to get anywhere near. It's stepped into the kingdom of peers that are regarded as absolute, undoubtable, heavily worshipped classics. It really stands out in the public's eye as the pinnacle of what 2D platforming can be. It's had 4 sequels, and it redefined who Donkey Kong is, in both design and characteristics. If not for the original Donkey Kong Country, DK would probably be relegated to Nintendo character purgatory, with the likes of Toadsworth, Pauline, and Geno, making the odd cameo appearance now and again, but never staying for as long as they're welcome. But there's a grim message that every Nintendo fan is going to need to hear sooner or later, even if they don't agree with it. It's that while Donkey Kong Country has a lot of strengths, it also has an ugly side. This game has problems, major problems. Namely, there's 3 main issues, which hamper the experience if you're paying close enough attention to make yourself aware of them. First of these would be the controls are very slippery, and there's really no other way to put it. I'm not talking Luigi and Mario 2 here, I mean annoyingly imprecise. Maybe it's the Switch Online's emulation, maybe it's the modern TV, or maybe it's playing with an analog stick, but like a Miami housewife, it could go for some tightening up. It's especially true for the underwater stages. While the music in these levels approaches divinity, playing through them can be an endlessly frustrating experience. Second, while the graphics are rightfully iconic, there's no clear lines of where all parts of the game meet. The platforms you stand on have no obvious beginning or end. Plus, Donkey and Diddy look like they're floating in front of the environment, rather than a part of it. It's similar to Final Fantasy VII, which is fine for a story-based RPG, but not so much for a 2D platformer. Precision jumps are required of the player, and that's not an easy ask when you combine these 2 problems. The key issue, though, would lie in how the difficulty is set up. To be honest, I've been absolutely abusing the SNES Online Rewind feature. As far as the game is concerned, I've never lost a life, and the counter is now uselessly ticking up and up. But in time traveling back to the second before each time I die, I'm noticing that I can easily clear each obstacle in the second attempt. What this is telling me is that the game itself isn't exactly difficult, the hazards are just popping out at you with very little notice. This ties back to the graphics again, because the Kongs and the Kremlings take up a sizable portion of the screen. In the 2D Mario games from this era, Mario's character sprite takes up a much smaller percentage of the screen. This wasn't just for aesthetics. It was to give you a better lay of the land, to give you the ability to plan out your maneuvers, instead of being bombarded by certain death traps with a split-second notice. That's why Super Mario Bros. Deluxe on the Game Boy Color is inferior to its NES counterpart. The smaller, more zoomed-in screen gives you less advanced notice of upcoming obstacles. Keeping the characters small in a game like Donkey Kong Country is a clear ideal choice, which leads me to believe that them taking up so much of the player's eyesight isn't a preferred decision, it's a necessity. The Donkey and Diddy sprites, and all the ones in the game for that matter, are well detailed, but there's only so much you can pack into small figures. When you're working with the limited resolution of the Super Nintendo, if you want them to look better, you'd have to go bigger. I have to assume that the sprites we ended up with are the smallest the designers could get them, while still looking good enough to make a lasting impression. It's sad that the gameplay had to suffer because of the graphics, not only because that happens so often, but because it's additionally painful to imagine what the talented developers at Rare could have created if they weren't married to this art style. And maybe this method of difficulty works for some people, but not for me. Simple obstacles coming at me with barely any reaction time isn't a good challenge, it just feels cheap. Thank God I have the rewind button, because going through this legitimately would be excruciating. Difficulty in a game should come directly from how challenging obstacles are by themselves. Trekking through half a level to meet one vulture that will launch a coconut at you from 10 pixels away is a downright bad experience for everyone involved. When you think about a game with well-designed difficulty, like Dark Souls, it's obvious that the hard parts come down to the individual enemies you're trying to beat, not any other lame reason. While I may not be playing in the way the game designers originally intended, I might not have noticed this without the rewind button. Instead, I'd be wandering through the game, not knowing why it was coming off badly to me. Having this sinking feeling in the back of my mind that something was very wrong with the game, but not being able to put my finger on what. It's interesting how playing this classic game in a different fashion gave me some unique perspective that I probably wouldn't have had otherwise. Maybe we can learn things about other older titles by playing them in new ways. That's the great thing about video games. No matter how many times you play the same one, the experience will always be just a little different. And even if that does mean revealing some downsides we could have ignored before, at least we're learning more about why games are the way they are.